This Fed Gov Today program is sponsored by Oracle and Carasoft. On this edition of Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose, the common thread that's holding up military shipbuilding. The Pentagon's AI edge won't just be on the battlefield, and the talent drive is on for one leg of the nuclear triad. Welcome to Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose. Coast Guard and Navy leaders say building capacity at shipyards and budget problems are two factors in their challenges in building out their fleets. Other factors, though, may be more under the control of the two services. Shelby Oakley is Director of Contracting and National Security Acquisitions at the Government Accountability Office. Shelby, welcome. It's great to talk to you. You're working recently on both Coast Guard and Navy shipbuilding. There was a common thread among testimony that you gave to a House subcommittee recently and work that you did on the Navy. You wrote about an issue called design maturity in shipbuilding. What does that term mean, Shelby?
Yeah, design maturity basically means that you understand the steel structures of the ship, the basic arrangements of the major systems on the ship, the sequence of the build, and then you have that all documented in a 3D model before you start construction. That's our main marker of design maturity for our leading practices that we've been reviewing for years.
What did you find as you looked at both the Navy and Coast Guard separately, different pieces of work, but concurrently? You've been working on these issues for a long time. Where are they on design maturity? Where are they introducing it into the process versus where you see commercial organizations introducing it into their shipbuilding processes?
Yeah, it's certainly a common challenge that we see amongst both the Coast Guard and the Navy shipbuilding programs is this lack of design maturity before they begin construction. That means bending metal. So when you don't have basic information, like I outlined before, it really increases the risk that you will run into problems down the road, that you haven't really fleshed out all the issues with the design, and you're building using steel, and therefore then the cost of rework really becomes a major problem. And we're seeing that across Coast Guard ships and Navy ships, and it's been a factor for many years.
What are they doing to potentially exacerbate the problem, and what are they doing to potentially solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, the problem seems to be exacerbated when not only just the first ship is allowed to progress with construction without the design complete. It's when you begin to authorize subsequent ships to begin construction without that design complete. Therefore, then any changes that you have to make as you ring out the design reverberate throughout the entire fleet of ships.
One program that you testified about recently was the Polar Security Cutter program. The Coast Guard currently has one operational and one that it uses for spare parts. It's building 3 more. What's the status that you found when you went to look at the Polar Security Cutter program versus where it's supposed to be schedule-wise and cost-wise right now?
Yeah, the Polar Security Cutter program is very delayed. It's still in the design process after 5 years, and it's experiencing some significant challenges related to designing a polar security cutter for the first time in 50 years in the United States, a shipbuilder that lacks experience doing that, and then just some basic expertise issues that would allow them to recognize challenges with the design before they become a problem. One of the things that I testified on was the fact that they completely designed the level of the lowest deck wrong, and then that required a lot of redesigns throughout a bunch of different systems. And those are the kinds of things that should be caught early on that aren't being caught in programs like the Polar Security Cutter.
Quote of yours to the committee: some of the fundamental challenges and disappointing outcomes I see with Coast Guard acquisitions are not unique. You write in the work about the Navy that we'll link on the show page today, fedgovtoday.com, a comparison of commercial companies that build ships to what the Navy is doing. What do you see there, and what do you see compared to the Navy, or comparing the Navy and Coast Guard in terms of these commercial practices that may be applicable, understanding there are big differences between building commercial ships and building military ships?
Yeah, there's not a lot of similarities between the approach that the Navy takes and that we've seen leading commercial shipbuilders and buyers around the world take. These leading companies, they take very disciplined approaches to their programs. They require require very stable, well-developed business cases at the beginning that are predicated on not really taking huge technological leaps, really understanding what the art of the possible is, working toward a pretty stable design, a mature design before they begin bending metal. They also have a lot of in-house expertise that enable them to understand the design and understand how to oversee the builder building the design to be able to make different decisions and minimize risk on those programs. I think one of the final things that is an important thing to note, that is a key distinction between the Navy and the Coast Guard and these commercial builders and buyers, is they have digital tools that allow them to be super efficient in how they design and build ships. So like a large cruise ship can be designed and built in about 4 years. As I mentioned for the Polar Security Cutter, it's still being designed, just designed after 5 years. And the same is true with many Navy ships, that it takes them longer to just design a ship than these commercial builders take to build an entire ship.
Now, I imagine an argument from the sea services would be, well, building a battleship or building a Polar Security Cutter is completely different than building a commercial ship. To what extent did you find that that's the case? And to what extent did you find that there are sufficient similarities that the sea services could adopt some of these leading practices that you described?
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at our leading practices, you wouldn't be surprised by any of them. They are basic, fundamental things that, let's say you're building a house, that you would expect to have in place. You wouldn't hire an inexperienced contractor, allow them to begin building your house without completing the design, and then include no margin for risk in that process. And those are kind of the basic things that we think that the Navy and the Coast Guard could focus on so that it could better manage those unique risks that come with military shipbuilding programs, like needing to meet Coast Guard specifications or Navy specifications. And so I think it's really important to recognize that if you kind of focus on the fundamental things that you can do right, it allows you to better manage the things that are more difficult. The other thing I would mention is, you know, the commercial companies, they don't take these big leaps. They wouldn't sign up to a business case that is predicated on a technology working that hasn't been proven to work. And that's just a fundamental difference in the approach that commercial companies take versus the Navy or the Coast Guard that leaves them in different positions in terms of predictable outcomes.
Is there room for the argument in your mind that, for example, with the PSC, we haven't had one for 50 years. These commercial companies are building new ships on a regular, ongoing cadence.
Yeah.
And so the companies that build the ships for them know to be able to predict workforce issues and all of that. A lot of those factors aren't, as I mentioned at the beginning, under the Coast Guard's control when they're going to get budget, when they're going to get authorization to build ships like that. Yeah,
it's a real problem, and it is one of the key distinctions between commercial shipbuilding and government shipbuilding, is that unpredictability of, you know, workflow, that kind of thing. But that type of risk wasn't unknown at the beginning of the Polar Security Cutter program. So that should have been factored into the cost and schedule estimates of, we haven't built one of these things in 50 years. The shipyard lacks expertise and has to do a lot of work to build up its capabilities. Therefore, then maybe we should set these cost and schedule targets or expectations for when, you know, the Coast Guard could be expecting this Polar Security Cutter a little bit differently to account for those risks.
We just have about a minute left. I read about 8 recommendations to the Coast Guard and more than, 8 recommendations to the Navy and more than 40 recommendations over the past decade to the Coast Guard. What are some of the commonalities in those recommendations to both services, Shelby?
Yeah, some of the things that we've been focused on are really trying to push the Coast Guard and the Navy to think about their design process and think about how they measure and monitor design progress in order to make those better decisions. Other recommendations have been focused on the beginning of the program, that business case aspect, making sure that you have really accounted for risk in your cost and schedule estimates so that everybody that's signing up to fund that program has an understanding of what it's going to take and entail. And we have a number of other things that we've asked them to focus on to become more in line with these leading commercial practices and become a better buyer. I think that's a fundamental difference between commercial buyers and the government. The government is just not a good buyer of ships, and commercial buyers have to be to stay in business.
Shelby Oakley, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You can find a link to Shelby's work and testimony on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the Pentagon's AI edge won't just be on the battlefield. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Dive deep into the latest advancements in maritime technology and defense. Watch Innovation in Government from Sea Air Space, available now on demand. You'll get exclusive insights from leaders at the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard as they discuss breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and digital innovations. Don't miss this unique perspective on the future of maritime defense and technology. Watch anytime you want on the Fed Gov Today YouTube channel and at fedgovtoday.com, sponsored by Carasoft. Welcome back. The military services are not just working on artificial intelligence projects for warfighting. They're trying all kinds of projects from training to predictive maintenance. Peter Guerra is Group Vice President for AI and Machine Learning for Oracle Government Defense and Intelligence. He says just about anything that data drives is worth considering.
It's really an exciting time. As we see a lot in the news, there's a lot of buzz around AI. There's a lot of different ways that people are using it in multiple ways across the commercial industries. Where I see our government customers focused on AI and analytics and data, that we have to be all inclusive around the different parts of AI that are typically used. One of the things that we see is it stretches across the entire continuum of mission. So everything from back office, so being able to understand your budget, your HR, and other things like that. Analytics is being used a lot for that. We're seeing that in maintenance, repair, and operations. So a number of our customers we're working with to understand, for example, flight patterns for different aircraft and how you can best predict whether a particular part is going to fail or not, as well as things like pilot performance and other areas like that. And then on the mission side, of course, we're seeing a lot of analytics and a lot of data around understanding, the battle space and, intelligence and doing that analysis, which, the government has been doing for quite a while.
There's tons of data there. One of the great conversations that's going on at this event is what to do with all that data, how to get it where it needs to be, and how to then have whoever it is that needs to have eyeballs on it at that place be able to interpret that data. What are you seeing as the best opportunities to do that, whether it's with AI, whether it's with ML or other applications moving forward?
Absolutely seeing a tremendous growth and interest in that. And that's actually something that's one of our areas of specialty and differentiation. What we're seeing is the data really can't be in a central place, especially for forces that are out at the edge. That's where they need the information. That's where they need to do a lot of the processing. And so we're seeing the concepts around things like data mesh, large scale, being able to have the right information at the right place with the right information that particular commander or whoever needs. And it doesn't have to just be from a mission application. Definitely things like soldier health is a really, really important area to apply data analytics to better understand, performance as well as, health concerns around the soldiers. And that all needs to happen not in some centralized place, but for these customers, what they need that both centralized and also at the edge available instantaneously. And that's some of the areas that we're working with our customers on right now.
You talked about the edge, and one of the great conversations that's going on here and broadly across the defense enterprise about edge computing is how much, obviously, data is necessary at the edge. How much compute power is necessary at the edge, and what's the trade-off that one should make in order to get what needs to be there, but keep away what doesn't need to be there. Do you get where I'm going there?
I understand, yeah. And there's a lot of, I think, debate right now around how much you actually do AI and what you do with the AI. Do you do training or inference? I'm a technical person, so what we typically recommend is having customers look at how do they do inference or interpretation at the edge, but do a lot of the training back in a large scale compute, because there is limited power, memory, and so forth. The other component around the edge, though, is being able to use that in what they call DDIL environments, right? So disconnected environments that may or may not have connectivity in the field. We see this across all parts of the U.S. government, in particular, the need to be able to operate sometimes in those situations, and whether it's on the border where there may not be some sort cellular or other type of signals, or even on a ship while it's out at sea, sometimes there aren't intermittent communications, and so it's that networking part plus the data part plus the interpretation of that data that is so core to being able to operate in those environments.
And regarding the interpretation of that data, I had a conversation not here but recently with a uniform leader, and that person, I asked that person, how are you going about making those people at the edge data analysts, data experts? And he said the point is that they don't need to be, that they shouldn't be. Absolutely. What does that look like from industry's perspective about what you can provide to the government, to the defense sector, so that that man or woman at the tip of the spear doesn't have to be a data expert to be able to use that information effectively? Yeah,
absolutely. And that's actually something that Oracle has worked on for a very, very long time. We have a number of I would say tools and services and opportunities for folks at the edge. They don't have to be a data scientist. They don't necessarily have to know Python or code. We have a number of what's called low code, no code type environments that allows them to piece very complex analytics together, but in a visual way. And I think one of the power that we see around, the rise of generative AI and large language models in particular is that very human interface that you can have with your data. So we enable a lot of the conversational type of AI, so you can understand what your data is telling you without necessarily having to pull together a very large program in order to do that.
Peter Guerra of Oracle. You can read more about AI in the military on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the talent drive is on for one leg of the nuclear triad. Fed Gov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Melissa Carson, Vice President and General Manager at Iron Mountain, on innovation in government from Sea Air Space, presented by Carasoft.
People don't think anymore, right, that an innocent phone or even a really, really old laptop has data on it. Oh, okay, so they take the hard drive off and crush it. What we're finding is, though, particularly as the generations of technology has increased, and you're seeing here at the show, particularly with the Navy, is there's data on those chips also. So that's where we find some innocent person thinking, I've taken the hard drive out, I've destroyed it, I'm okay, but that's not true.
Mm-hmm. For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. A new talent onboarding program is moving from pilot to scale at the Navy's Strategic Systems Programs. Kelly Lee, the SSP Plans and Programs Division Director, calls the Newcomer Onboarding Workshop Program a special recipe. Vice Admiral Johnny Wolfe Jr., U.S. Navy, is Director for Strategic Systems Programs. Admiral, welcome. It's great to see you. What is special about the special recipe at SSP? Welcome.
Yeah, so thanks for asking that. As part of America's warfighting Navy, talent is really important. And as we, in Strategic Systems Programs in this mission, it's even more critical. And so what we've decided to do is figure out how we take each individual within our program and connect them to the mission. So we've started what we call Strategic Systems Programs new onboard orientation program. And what that workshop does, SSP Now, it brings in a cohort of new folks to the organization, and that doesn't mean that they're new to the workforce. What it means is they're new to this organization and how this organization needs to provide the most credible strategic deterrent that this nation's ever known. And so we do that, we put them in a cohort, and we put them together for a year. And we not just train them in their job, but we talked about the history of the program. We talked about the criticality of what the Navy is doing to support the nuclear triad. And then we send them down to various installations and other organizations to really see what their individual talents are doing for the bigger mission for the United States Navy.
What is your sense of what is similar and what is different, or maybe even unique, about SSP compared to other parts of the Navy that you want those people to learn?
Yeah, certainly. So again, if you look at what we do providing the nation's nuclear deterrent, the Navy provides 70% of our day-to-day nation's deterrent, which is absolutely critical, not just for our American way of life, but for our allies and partners as well. So as we get them to understand that criticality, we're a very small program if you look at the scale of influence that we have both within the Navy and our nation. And so we get them to understand why the way we do business and how critical the way we do business is, not just for us, but for the American people to have absolute confidence that our submarine force's deterrent works every single day.
We are about a year and a half or 2 years into your last strategy document, which was titled Director's Intent 2022. And that document references former CNO Gilday's NAV Plan 21 and some other documents. You mentioned right at the beginning America's Warfighting Navy. That is the current CNO's document, guiding document. How does what you're doing and the mission you're fulfilling and the way that you're moving Director's Intent 22 to support that, what's the intersection there, sir?
Yeah, so Admiral Franchetti, as she's come on board, as she has talked about America's warfighting Navy, and particularly as we look at what that means. And if you look at the three things she said, warfighting, warfighters, and foundation. Well, if you look at what we've set out in this program, we call it Sea-Based Strategic Deterrent 2084, and that's simply to get us to really think long-term about strategic deterrence. But as you break that down into what we call the Director's Intent 2022, it absolutely ties into where Admiral Franchetti is going. The first one being, if you look at the three things we said, we have to sustain the deterrent that we have today on our Ohio-class SSBNs. We have to prepare for the future with the new systems that will go on Columbia-class and will go on our allies in the United Kingdom submarines. And we have to make sure that we protect that partnership with the United Kingdom. So that's how we're getting warfighting capability today and into the future. For our warfighters, if you look at what the Admiral has said, it really is, how do we train? How do we give our warfighters, both sailors and civilians, everything that they need, all the training, so that they really are our advantage?
I note that there are three enablers in Director's Intent 22, and they sync pretty well with what Admiral Franchetti has just put out in 2024.
They absolutely do. If you look at people, again, it's how are we getting our sailors and our civilian workforce ready today and into the future. It's our industry partners. How do we bring them along to everything that they need to help us do to accomplish the Navy's mission? And then you look at the infrastructure, both within the government and within industry, of how we're going to coalesce all this together to continue to be the premier warfighting Navy that this nation needs.
How do you mark something like Director's Intent this far in to determine whether we're on target where we want to be, or maybe in this one area we should refocus or redirect in some way?
Yeah, so what we've done is we've actually set up lines of effort where, based on each one of the things that we've got to accomplish, we've got a series of tasks that we've laid out for our leadership and our workforce to achieve, and we monitor those and we report on those. Actually, I get an update twice a week on how we're proceeding on all of those lines of effort, which gets us to Director's Intent and gets us where Admiral Franchetti would like the bigger Navy to go in this business.
What specifically do you need right now, need more of, whether it's in the talent realm or in the hardware or software realm? What do you need, or what do you need more of, sir?
So what we really need today is we need a very talented workforce that understands the mission, that's all in, which is why we've started things like SSP now to go out there and find that talent. We need more players on the field, both in uniform and in the civilian ranks. So this is part of the way we're doing that. And of course, again, as you look at America's warfighting Navy, that is where the Navy is really focusing, getting the right people to be able to continue to stay ahead. That's the first one. And then from an industry perspective, we are back into revitalizing our industry partners into all of these critical missions that not just I have to do within the deterrent, but but the bigger Navy has to do to be successful.
I'll follow your sports analogy, sir. What positions do you need those players to play when you want to put them on the field?
So I need them in all positions.
Yeah.
I need guards, I need forwards, I need centers. We need everybody, and that's just because we're into the NCAA Final Four these days. But we need all of those positions because, quite frankly, no one position alone, as we know, can win. It's got to be a team sport, and so we're looking for those individuals that not only want to be individual contributors, but understand that contribution plays to a bigger integration of what we need to accomplish.
How will you look at some future point? Again, similar question to before, but what will you look at to determine, okay, as I'm formulating director's intent, 25, 26, I don't know your timeline, to build onto this? How will you look at what you've accomplished to determine what the next steps are?
Yeah, so one of the metrics that we're using from a people perspective is how many are we bringing in and how long are they staying within the organization. So we've started to monitor that, and we're having some success with that because of programs like SSP Now. And we'll continue to look and adjust based on what we are asked to do, what Congress asks us to do, what the Department of Defense asks us to do, to continue to monitor where do we need that talent set and how do we go recruit that and then retain that within the Navy.
And all of the things that are happening across the world right now, how does that impact the way that you look at the mission that you are supposed to deliver?
So for this mission, certainly it's what we do in nuclear deterrence. It underpins all of the other national strategies and war plans that we've got. So holistically, we've stayed focused on making sure that the deterrent today remains credible. And as we watch where we're going into the future, certainly we've all talked about Russia's recapitalizing everything that they do. China is building up their triad. We remain focused on making sure the systems that we put in our warfighters' hands give them that advantage every single day.
You've referenced the tournament. You're obviously focused, and you have a lot of choices in Texas. What's your choice as we get closer to the end of the tournament, sir?
Well, based on where we're at now with the Sweet 16, University of Houston. All
right. Thank you very much for being on with me, sir. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You can read more about the Navy's strategic systems programs on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment. Here's Louis Bergeron, Senior Vice President for Navy at Govini, on Innovation in Government from Sea Air Space, presented by Carasoft.
So if I can tell you all the different parts that this manufacturer makes and all the different systems that those parts go on across the entire Navy enterprise, I can start thinking about demand in a new and innovative way where I can aggregate demand across multiple different systems and multiple different programs. It's that application of data at scale, which a lot of times is tough to do in the government context because the way that we structure our program offices and the PEOs, the program executive offices, and the systems commands as a whole. And so what we try to do is break down those data silos to allow our customers to be able to see the whole breadth of the demand and the supply side.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, health IT leaders from across government will exchange ideas and share successes and challenges at ACT IAC's Health Innovation Summit. Speakers from HHS, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT, and more federal agencies are already confirmed. The summit's Thursday, June 6th at the Carasoft Conference and Collaboration Center in Reston. You can read more about the summit, look at the lineup, and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.